I love that vision. Our AI agents can totally handle that. They can route calls, give options, and even schedule them appointments without breaking a sweat. Sounds like a match made in heaven. Want to see it in action? We could set up a demo. When's a good time for you?
In this episode of Inspiring Computing, Max shares how he created that AI that you just heard called Julia, and how Julia can be integrated into phone agents, but maybe transforming people's businesses around a practical use case of AI. Not only does Julia schedule appointments and potentially replace that first line of phone calls, but could be also integrated into CRMs and completely transforming the way that sales and or internal request services, HR processes are done. The Inspiring Computing podcast is where computing meets the real world. This podcast aims to trigger your curiosity by talking to proficient and advanced users of MATLAB, Python, and Julia, who use these tools to deepen their understanding of the world, simulate, explore trade-offs, and gain insights that help companies add more value. In addition to this, we will also be talking to product marketing, toolbox authors, package developers, and library maintainers to see what drives the development and what issues they're solving for others to benefit from. Welcome, Max, to Inspiring Computing.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me.
You and I met briefly at a technical conference, and it took me all of 2 seconds to believe in your new company that we'll get into about generative AI and the value it brings. And I thought it was just so inspiring that I thought I have to have Max on the podcast. But then I did a bit more research on your personal background, and you've got a super interesting trajectory before you actually created this company. So maybe, Max, can you tell me a little bit of who you are and what's your super origin story before we get into your existing company?
Yeah, originally I'm from Ukraine, and I really started my career in 2001. I was in different companies, like finance companies, telecom companies, like NTS, banks, some other companies who were doing the e-commerce stuff. I was focused mostly on machine learning, analytics, a bit of CRM projects, and so on. I had some experience with the implementation of sophisticated algorithms in terms of data science and machine learning in different businesses. So, for example, like predicting different types of customer behavior, segmentation, real-time applications of machine learning, or scoring the customer base, and so on. I went to different countries, to Europe, to Cyprus, to Singapore, to United States, to actually work as essentially a senior manager or director for different applications, analytics or data science or CRM. I went to the Netherlands like 4 years ago. I had a pretty nice opportunity to join the company here. And I worked for a company called Teamhouse. Then I moved to the company called GoStudent, where I also have the customer analytics team. That is basically was my career path. But I was all about the analytics and data science and the AI and machine learning before it was super sexy. So you can imagine, let's say 2005 or 2006, where it is some boring statistical mumbo jumbo. No one knows about it at all. So but my previous technical background has helped me to advance in this career. But now it's super hot topics everywhere. Everyone talks about AI. Everyone is AI expert. Everyone is trying to doing some philosophy about the AI, about how the AI should be aligned and so on. So it's happening all the time.
So anyone who's traveled a lot typically has a lot of experience and clashes with culture and ways of working, but it's also a way of collecting good ideas, right? So you've probably picked up interesting thoughts along the way. But you studied, if I'm not mistaken, physics? Did you start?
Yeah. Initially, I studied the physics in the Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology, where I entered in 1995. But after that, I actually moved from the physics and data science career. I actually moved to the management, let's say, actually got the MBA degree in Kingston University, England. So it is one of the things that I'm very proud of. So it was really interesting experience to get this kind of multifaceted background.
You created a company called Callr.AI. This triggered my curiosity when we first met. Tell me about what is this company Callr.AI about and what makes it so special?
Yeah, exactly. So I decided to work on the AI voice agents. So that's why I've created a company called Callr.AI. That means I wanted to focus my business on the practical application of the voice AI technology. So what can be practical applications for maybe many business. So like many business, telecom, insurance, or maybe even, I don't know, like realty and dentist. So like it can be real multiple applications in many industries. So yeah, I can give you some examples. So like, for example, answer calls. It can do the service over the phone. It can do the market research stuff. For example, you can program it to get the dialogue with your customers and actually get some feedbacks out of them. And then you can analyze this feedback, and AI can really produce the report about how your customer base is structured, what are the different insights about the customer behavior, what are the different stories or customer persona that your customer exhibit.
Yeah, so maybe just to make sure I'm on the same page as you. So is this kind of, let's say I have a company, a large company, and it's always a bit of a process to figure out who answers the phones, right? So there's usually also a series of steps that need to take place and rerouting people. And you often get into a queue and there's discussions. What is the background music that people should listen to while waiting to be attended or things like that, whether be that as a doctor, dentist, or even any large, I don't know, airlines or whatnot. There's always this waiting time and you're never really sure if you're paying for the phone number or not. But on the side of the people organizing that, it's also quite a challenge to make sure that there's someone always available. So are you suggesting that this tool or program that you have or company focuses on removing the person from being the first point of contact in such a way that it replaces with a AI agent who can speak as if it was a human to be able to
Yeah.
reroute and make appointments and things like that? Is this what the Callr.AI is all about?
Yeah, exactly. So like it can do like multiple roles. It can do like a service agent. It can do a bit of research or even some sales, like sales on outbound or inbound calls. So it is really like frustrating when you are waiting 20 minutes in line to get the actual response from the human and get your issue solved. Sometimes it's better to talk to a robot, I would say, or AI, and maybe it can give you some meaningful answer or advice or even solve your problem before you needed to get to the actual human. So I feel like maybe 80% of these calls, the AI is perfect for that. So you don't need to have someone to recite some instructions because actually, yeah, yeah,
So it's interesting because indeed you're right. There's different types of calls that you could receive. There's the first one that is common on government agencies. Press 1 for this option, press 2 for that option. That's like pre-recorded voice that someone says, okay, I either need this or I need that. And you listen through the options and eventually get there. But that's actually not such a nice personal touch. You have a real feeling you're talking to a robot. So now you're suggesting that same alternative could be very quickly replaced by somebody with AI, right? And this is generative AI. And I think many companies in the world struggle with, okay, AI is a transformative technology. Gen AI is an important thing, but many people don't really know where to get started. In particular, if you're a non-technical person in the background, right? So if your field of study is something completely different, AI is maybe a hype and you're not sure when to drive it. So you're saying, let me break it down. This is a concrete example where we can record calls and have a more personal view. And the outcome is super powerful because this can be on all the time, right? There is no risk of a grumpy person or there is no
yeah,
risk of something like that.
yeah, exactly. I would say that you can bump your service level tremendously. Usually you have a huge shortage of actual humans in the contact centers, and therefore your real service level is pretty low. You can encounter this in many, not just in the government agencies, but even in the established companies like some telecom companies or some banks or insurance companies where they're waiting a lot to just getting to the human and getting some meaningful response. That is a bit of a kind of embarrassment in this AI age, because actually companies should really adopt this technology as soon as possible. Because if you're making your customers waiting in line, it's not the good sign of the customer-oriented business. And that's why I really want to focus on I'm always pushing for the customer centricity. I'm always pushing for the better customer view, for the better intuition of the business towards the customer. And you need to use all these AI technologies to build more customer-centric business. That's how I feel.
Yeah, so you and I did something interesting before this podcast recording is I called your AI assistant to see what it's like. So let's go through this conversation of me talking to Julia, which is the name of the AI that I got, and let's listen to it. And after that, I want to ask you a few questions, okay?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Hello, this is Julia, an AI sales agent from Callr.AI. I noticed you're interested in our AI voice assistants, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Awesome. So tell me a bit about your business. What do you do?
Hi, Julia. My name is Gareth Thomas, and I'm the co-founder of a software consultancy company.
Hey Gareth, a consultancy, nice. What kind of subjects do you specialize in, and how do you currently handle your phone calls?
So today we focus on mathematical simulations and helping customers get more value out of their software stack. And at the moment we have one general phone line, and every employee has their own separate phone number.
Got it. That sounds super interesting. So how's that working out for you? Any hiccups with handling calls or managing customer inquiries?
So we're looking to automate the general phone number. So in the ideal world, I would like to have someone like yourself, an AI, talk to our customers and be able to give them options. And based on those options, reroute to the right departments automatically. And if needed, also schedule appointments.
Oh, I love that vision. Our AI agents can totally handle that. They can route calls, give options, and even schedule them appointments without breaking a sweat. Sounds like a match made in heaven. Want to see it in action? We could set up a demo. When's a good time for you?
Yes, I would be really interested. Could we do it next Monday?
Next Monday works. Can I grab your email so I can send over the invite?
Sure. So my email is garrett@versionbay.com.
Give me a moment. Thanks, Gareth. I'll send the invite to Garrett at versionbay.com. Get ready to be amazed by how our AI can transform your customer interactions. Talk soon.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Gareth. Can't wait for our demo. It's going to be great. If you have any questions before then, just give me a shout. Have a
No,
fantastic day.
thank you
Uh,
very much. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, Gareth. Talk soon.
Bye. Okay, so now that we listened to that was super cool. First of all, Julia, why did you name this AI Julia? Is this something which is customizable?
Yeah, of course, you can name it however you want. It's just some random name that I like personally, and that's why I put it into the actual pipeline. It can be prompted to have different names, and you need to just select whatever you choose.
So it's not that the engine behind it is Julia, the programming language, and you thought this would be a funny joke. No.
But I like Julia as a programming language, so it's pretty nice. It also can be a good story, but it's not written on Julia.
So I had to check. It was actually a very interesting conversation that I felt like I was being listened to. There are techniques like when you learn a new language that you confirm your understanding and maybe ask a question, express some kind of emotion and passion towards what the other person is saying. So I found it interesting that Julia thought, oh, my company's an interesting thing. And that was nice to hear. But above and beyond that, Julia in this sense didn't just connect with me and ask me meaningful questions and follow a conversation. She actually booked a meeting for me. So that was super interesting that it caught me off guard because the first time you and I spoke about this, I thought, oh, okay, this is just a call center replacement kind of thing, replacing the menu options. But it's actually much deeper than that you can book meetings. So this is not just as a receptionist. This moves into a field of sales or marketing use cases. I was impressed and I automatically got a booking. So thank you very much, Julia, for organizing that.
Yeah, that's also one of the possible application of this technology, to be honest. And I would say that when you need someone to not just answer your calls, but also actively engage in the dialogue, actively understand the customer, actively figure out what it is all about. You can already use these kind of AIs. Wasn't able to do that maybe even 2 years ago.
Mm.
But with the recent advancements in the LLM technologies, the response can be quite meaningful. So it can really impersonate different types of behavior, and it can really do the interesting stuff for your customers. For example, it can even query your backend, or it can query some databases that you have, or CRM, or whatever, to extract some relevant information about your customers and get the actual response connected to this personalized information. For example, like names, or your customer sum of products that your customer bought, or some other stuff, or maybe some stage in the customer development process that your customer is, or the segment the customer is. So like multiple ways of implementing this technology exists. Yeah.
So before we get into the exact details of how we would develop it and some of the tool chain and the tech stack behind the scenes, just to make sure that I'm understanding a bit of the applications here. So I naively thought it was just a replacement for that first line of a call receptionist, but then it can actually schedule meetings. So that's like an active thing. But it's actually, the way you're describing it feels like this is much bigger and broader than that, where you can personalize it with different names, maybe language, accents, so that's clear. But it's more important that you could actually automatically query any large database so that you have much more context. And actually, the average person doesn't have a full context. Like when I call a doctor or a dentist for reception, there's always this waiting time, and the receptionist either has to look at my history and maybe read it, and I have these awkward feelings as she's like looking at it while I'm on the phone. This actually can happen at a much, much faster pace, and you guarantee that context is 100% accurate. And that gives me, as a person calling in, oh, this company actually knows what they're doing, and it makes you different. So the fact that you can give it context on the fly for any point in time, for any customer, this really scales at a much, much quicker way than having to have the phone number, the general phone number for an operation in country A, B, or C. You actually have a fully automated thing that can figure out where on people are calling from, automatically have the right context, making it a more meaningful conversation. And you also shared that actually you record this behind the scenes. So I'm assuming that you could even take this to the next level of recording and automatically populating CRM calls and note taking, which is actually always a pain point of how uniform is everybody writing things in CRM for senior management to make business decisions on some kind of KPIs and asking the right questions and things of that nature. Is that also a fair idea of where this could actually go?
So it is to the point where you can transcribe all the calls. So like you can transcribe all the interactions with the customers. And not just you can transcribe them, you can analyze the transcriptions and understand what are the different types of requests your customers are having, and maybe how to understand what are the pain points or the problems the customers are having. These can be even the research tool, right? And it can really actively interact with the customers, maybe not just answering the questions, but trying to ask your customers some questions. For example, if you wanted to be like a customer researcher or the customer insight generation tool, it is also possible. It can categorize different types of requests. It can really structure the whole sense of your interaction with the customer and figure out what are the different types of this interaction and how should you handle it. Maybe you should optimize your process. Maybe you should optimize your product itself, because currently there are so many customer interactions just being lost in the process. So like no one is just trying to figure out what's going on, why the customers are calling, what is the root cause analysis for that, what are the reasons for your business. Maybe they have some particular problem with this particular feature, for example. And that is giving you so much additional insights about how you should improve your business, how you should restructure your processes, handle your future customer interactions through any channels. So basically, you can do it even on the today's level of maturity of the technology. So it is totally possible to aggregate all this data, aggregate this information automatically, and produce super valuable insights about your customers, about how the customers are interacting with the product, how the customers are getting their needs fulfilled, and so on. So that is also a big deal for many businesses.
So I think this sounds super interesting, but there has to be a few gotchas around here, right? Maybe to peel away the layers of the onions. How easy is this to get set up? It's not that I guess that you just buy this and then you plug it in and you're off to the races. You've articulated that there's a few options that you can do this. What does it realistically look like for a business owner to implement something like this? Is there a phase where you buy it and then you have to retrain it for contextual wise? How long does this take? Is this like a 6-month approach, or do you have to give all the past conversations, or do you need to record the existing process and say, this is the ideal kind of answer? What does that look like when, let's say, someone buys into this idea?
So imagine you are just a small business and you don't need something like super complex and super in-depth. Well, then you can just use the platform we developed, and you need to just set up your assistant with some process that we already established. So like you need to select the voice, you need to select the language, you need to select some things like how your agent should behave. You also need to explain the nature of your products. You need to prompt your agent about how the agent should behave and so on. Then you can plug in some customer data. For example, if you want to have some inbound calls, then you need to have the number. We can integrate with the telephony. And also what we can do, basically, we can do the outbound calls, of course, for the legitimate purposes, because we don't want to have something like a cyber spamming or something like that. I think like it's illegal in most countries. That's why we don't encourage such use. And so basically that is pretty simple. It can be done within the week, I would say, if you're just small business. But if you're a bigger business and if you really need some bigger projects, we are doing this as well. For example, on demand, we can do some custom integrations with your tools, with your backend systems, and so on. It will, of course, cost a bit more, but it will give you some flexibility on how you will get the information out of the system. And also you can track all the calls, you can see the results, you can see the actual transcriptions of every call, and you can understand whether the call was a success or a failure, for example, in terms of whether the result was reached or not. And it depends on the complexity of the project. Yeah, in some projects, it can take a couple of months, for example, but it depends really on the complexity of infrastructure that we need to integrate. And of course, depends on the types and the number of use cases that we need to automate, because essentially it's a lot of that is customer integration, customer infrastructure integration, let's say, and also like business process, because we need to streamline how your agent should react on different types of, let's say, inquiries and questions. And we need to really figure out how to make it robust and really answer all the different types of calls that we need to handle, let's say.
So I can understand that there's the simple out of the box experience, but I can fully see that if you want to look at calendars, meetings, you have to set up some kind of process of which calendars are available. Is it the sales team, which geographical region? And if you want to plug it into a CRM, that maybe each CRM's got a specific API, or you want to give it contextual data from a database or specific questions. So I can understand that those questions then add value, but there's a bit more customization that you can't have an out-of-box experience. But then as you were talking about this, you got me thinking, because there's a common misconception or maybe not full understanding from most people around AI that many people think, okay, it's you train something and then it's continuously learning. But is this the case in your place? Do you deploy a specific model and then that is what you get, and you can be sure for the next 5 years, if you don't touch it, the answers will always be the same. It will be behaving in the same way. Or do you set it up in such a way that as more and more phone calls are attended, that it self-learns? And if it's self-learning, it's adjusting. How do you keep track of that? So in this spectrum, where do you fall? Do you fall into the use case of, yep, it's trained once, it's got a semi-deterministic behavior, but it's not that it's learning based on every phone call? Or do you encourage people to go for the option of, okay, as I have a phone call, it will just get better and better. Maybe month one was okay. After 10,000 calls about the same thing of how to schedule a meeting, it could get super good at that without having to have all the other stuff around it. How does it work? What are you thinking about this?
Yeah. So currently we are not retraining the models from scratch. We can fine tune the models, and by fine tuning and like really like fine tuning and doing the RAG process, if you know what I mean. So that means like we can actually ingest the information from your previous calls or your previous interaction into the context if you want to do that. But it's really depends on the nature of your business and how you want to approach your customer interactions. So what we can do also, we can do some kind of industry specific models, but we need to really align with the customers of using some particular sensitive data for that, because some industries are really, again, sensitive about how their data are being used and so on. So like you need to be careful about retraining some other models that you don't really control, I would say.
Right.
And you can understand that. So like from the business perspective, especially when you have a bigger business, you need to have like more or less, I don't know, like full control or maybe a huge deal of trust to this language model that you'll be using, because actually essentially it is impacting your customer experience, it is impacting your customer loyalty and so on. But again, depending on the customer needs, we can fine tune the model. We can really make it specific to some industry, to some use cases that you wanted to emphasize. And it is totally possible, but it's not an automatic process. It's right now it's a process that is managed by the team, let's say externally.
Yeah.
And we can do it on demand, I would say.
Because I think there's something really important there. So I can imagine that as a place to get started to build confidence in a setup like this, because it's a bit of a game changer. You want a somewhat deterministic way that you say, okay, the status quo, this is how we do things, right? So you implement the system, you get your teams on board, you optimize your processes. But I can very quickly imagine that companies also don't stay stationary. So let's say a company comes up with a new offering, they have a new product on the market, and they want to answer the question differently, and there has to be an adaptation phase. The same way companies typically have to train internal staff on different shapes and roles of, okay, how do you best answer? How do you reroute it for this particular question? What are the right probing questions to understand the pain point? The same process is also realistic for an agent to also have to update. So it's not that you sell your Julia, in this case, to a company and then never come back. So it's also a fact that you will be following your customers to make it better as time progresses. And if they have additional requirements, they need to engage you. And that could be another version of Julia. So it could be Julia now, who's knowledgeable about product A, B, C, and D. Whereas the first version of Julia was only knowledgeable about product A.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. And by the way, we can do it in terms of like additional products. We can do it like pretty quickly because it's just the retrieval augmented generation. So RAG process, you just need to ingest the additional data in the knowledge database, and then it will automatically know the context of the new product and so on. The fine tuning is needed when you have really like different types of behavior that you wanted to train the model on. For example, long, lengthy, in-depth conversation about, I don't know, psychology. Or so, for example, if you're doing some kind of virtual psychologist who wants to talk to your customers actually to do this analysis of their personalities or some problems they have, then you definitely need some fine-tuning stuff. So it's not just the RAG implementation or some prompting. It doesn't work this way.
But then just to make maybe I understand. So your average customer base, so when you use terms like RAG and fine tuning. So if you're coming from the machine learning domain, this kind of makes sense and you've come across it. But I would argue the vast majority of the world actually doesn't quite understand what that entails, right? And it's actually something you want to hide away. But I can also imagine that it's scary if you are, let's say I'm a receptionist, right? At a dentist or a doctor's thing. Should I be scared that my job all of a sudden is at risk because my company doesn't need my friendly voice when I pick up the phone and I'm a happy person? And should I be scared that my job is at risk? Or how do you actually see that from the people whose jobs will be impacted by something like this?
Yeah, I think the company should shift the focus from the like regular people who are talking over the phone to so-called like customer champions, which are a bit of a different profile, a bit of a different role. It's not just answering the phone calls. It's not just doing the simple stuff. It's really going deep into the customer inquiries and trying to help them in all possible ways. So like maybe you need to uplift your existing human workforce who are doing the actual, let's say, phone calls, answering, or just calling the customer base to a level when they can just really do the in-depth help for your different customer needs. And when your customer agents transfer from the regular call center managers to the customer champions, they can tremendously improve your customer service. So like you can just hit a totally different point in the scale of customer centricity as business. So like you need to really focus on giving your particular roles that you currently having this additional training and how they can use the AI, how they can use the customer knowledge to help them better, to maybe respond to their additional inquiries and so on, or something like that. So like make sure that you really can handle all the toughest requests which AI cannot handle right away. So there is a difference between the roles here.
So it's interesting you say that because in my mind, the way I thought of it, it's not that you're replacing people. What you're actually doing, empowering them to do other things, which actually might be more meaningful in the sense that I could imagine very well that when you implement this, the people who used to be the first person to pick up the call, it could be actually interesting for them to read or listen to and then give their experience and feedback saying, actually, there's a better way of doing this. And they then become a place of catching, tutoring, and shifting and having a conversation, which maybe they never actually had in the past, because it's always very hard for some person to say, oh, you should do this. People get offended sometimes when you give them feedback in maybe not the best way. So not all managers also do that in the right way. But if you tell Julia at this point doesn't have feelings, it feels like a much easier thing to say, actually, Julia could have done a better way of answering that. I would have done this. What do you think? And then you could have a conversation about how poorly or good Julia did it, and then say, can we get Julia to do it differently? And that feels like a much, much more productive conversation in an organization to be having versus, oh, how many calls per minute did you actually take? Or what was the waiting time looking like? Did we reduce it from 10 minutes to 7 minutes? Those KPIs feel like less useful, even though I understand their essence. You're shifting someone to a different category of role. Is that kind of where you see it evolving to?
Yeah, exactly. You can see that these human roles are really shifting to a place where you need to have really to be empowered by AI, just replaced by AI. And that is where you can learn a lot about your customers, about the interaction with the customers. So that's where you can just really understand your customers better, understand what can you change in your current business processes. So like how can you improve the whole pipeline of your customer service, how you can improve your pipeline of maybe some product pipelines, so how the product works. So like maybe this is the competitive advantage you can get out of your customers. And also you can get the kind of more customer intimacy. So in terms of you don't need essentially, I feel like the whole CRM concept will be migrated to the layer of AI interaction, because AI can really learn about your customers a lot, and it can really understand and remember everything about each of your customers. And you don't need to have that front end, like regular front end for human, that you need to pick some dashboards and actually to understand what was like last 5 transactions and so on. Regular customer agents doing that right now in CRM field. The AI, like a customer service AI, by default knows all that because it can integrate directly with your backend systems. It can directly integrate with your let's say a layer, like application layer. That is super important because using this knowledge, using this data, you can really customize the interactions with the AI based on this data.
Right.
Well, if you feel that this customer is really frustrated and it can be, for example, like actively retained because it has some problems right now. It's not just the compassion that the AI can, let's say, imitate, I would say, right? But it's also the different process. So you need to maybe offer some discounts. You need to offer some additional stuff to the customer, so on, rewards. So that is how your process should be structured and how the AI should react on different types of customers. It's also important. So maybe it's a businessman, maybe it's a housewife, or maybe it's like a student. It can be a totally different tone of voice. It can be totally different type of interactions, and maybe a totally different language. So for if you know that you're talking to a high-profile businessman, you will choose a totally different language compared to the situation when you're talking to a student, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, you need to customize your customer interactions. You need to understand what is the appropriate language, what is the appropriate context about this customer, what is appropriate knowledge about how the customer behaved in the past.
Yeah.
So all that set the stage for the better customer centricity of the whole company.
Right. So maybe to double click a little bit behind the scenes, can you maybe tell me a little bit about the tech stack and how you go about by making something so cool? I'm guessing maybe part of this is your secret sauce. I'm not so interested in the secret sauce, but I'm curious about the tech stack and how you go about making this. Can you share a few words about it?
Yeah, sure. So right now I'm using some open source technologies to make it work. So there are several open source LLMs that I'm testing right now, and I'm using in production some of them. And so these open source technologies are really important because you can really like fine tune them however you want, and you can really, let's say, do a lot of stuff with them. In terms of understanding the speech and transcribing the speech, there is also multiple things already invented in this field. So I'm not like totally like inventing something new from scratch, but the way of how you're using that, it is really important. So it's not just like background technologies that you're using for text to speech or speech to text or LLMs or some other things, but it's also the value that you are adding on top. So that is your additional understanding of how you should implement these AI voice agents, about how you should integrate it into the company infrastructure and so on. So I have a lot of experience in doing that with different companies. And so talking about the tech stack, again, like a regular Python, Java, all that stuff together, and TTS, LLM, STT, all this also goes to creating the realistic voice, realistic sounding voice, right? So it's also important to have like different languages support. So therefore you need like different types of LLMs, you need different voices trained on different languages, because sometimes it is really challenging when you have some tough language, because sometimes it can be like it can miss some right pronunciation of the word, or
something like that.
yeah, something like that. It is really difficult for the model to know how it should be pronounced and how it should be really make a meaningful answer to. So like it's also not that easy, but yeah, it is possible, and that's what we are doing.
So maybe just from my understanding is part of the value add here is, so most companies who will hear about AI, they won't have the necessary knowledge in-house to be able to do all of this. It is a ever-changing landscape. So you keep your finger on the pulse of all the different LLMs out there and understanding it.
Yeah.
But then your added value is also to facilitate the integration and to know when or what things you should be changing? Because it is careers of expertise to understand all of this, the intricacies of fine tuning versus not, and where you change your model and where it could go wrong. Because the other thought I'm curious about is, how do you actually test this in the validity? You released Julia, or I spoke to Julia, right? But I'm assuming there was a couple of versions of Julia before you got to the existing Julia. How do you test or validate or build that confidence? Do you let senior management of companies say, okay, try it out, talk to Julia, what are your thoughts? And if they're happy, it's a green light and you're off to the races? Or you must have maybe a more formal testing approach. Can you explain a little bit more how you test something which is so subjective by nature?
Yeah, of course. So what we are doing right now, we are having these testing scenarios, and we are just figuring out how the model should behave in different types of scenarios. So maybe we have scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3, and so on. And we are trying to test it with different people, maybe with different contexts and so on. But the scenario is always the same. It's defined. For example, it's defined by the business process, or it can be defined by the need of the customer and so on. We having the multiple conversations with the agent for each of the scenarios, and we can assess the results of each scenario. So like whether the task was completed, whether the result was achieved, and so on. And what we also doing, we are also surveying the actual people who the model is talking to about how they feel about talking to the AI, how they feel about getting the support from the AI agents and so on. So like we have like objective piece of thing, let's say it's how the task was done and whether it was completed or not. And we also have a subjective experience of the user, subjective experience of the customer when he is interacting with the AI.
Yeah.
So for example, in your case, we can direct you to the form when you just select the particular fields that you need to, okay, what is your experience about interacting with Julia, let's say, whether you were satisfied with your customer, with your responses, whether you're really satisfied with the tone of voice, with the responsiveness, with the language and so on. So all these things are actually giving the clue about how customers are perceiving our AI agents.
So if I understand this, there's like a 3-pronged approach, right? So there's you as the developer of the agent. So you probably have your own scenarios which are well determined, and it's probably a longer list than just one or two. And then you probably have got it grouped by categories per industry or things of that nature that you can do it. And then it's also maybe by profiles of the person it's speaking to. And then you probably, as a development side, you also try it out with users and you get subjective feedback. But the interesting part is the true test doesn't only happen on your side. You also implement a testing infrastructure as you roll it out at your customers. So it's not just, does this work? Yes or no? So when you say for small organizations, part of what happens in that first week is effectively to go through the scenarios and validate the testing itself. And then you're actually, maybe people don't call it testing and you call it scenarios, but you're building confidence that the system does what it's supposed to. And because you can make changes on the spot or quickly, you can do that. But once it's in place, it's not that it's going to be radically different. And that builds confidence and some kind of certainty, unless there's a strong need to become different. But
That's true.
But I am curious, many people, when they started ChatGPT, right? So it's not with voice, you're typing it out. There was at the very beginning a lot of skepticism because it was trained up to a certain moment in time. So ChatGPT's knowledge, it only go to a certain date. And then everyone is like, okay, if I ask a question that in recent history, it goes wrong. Do you also have something like that? Because I can imagine like dates, like the first time you talk to it, dates, if you don't connect it to an actual calendar with a specific API, what can happen is it's actually, I was trained in 2023. And when I say the word next Monday, it's actually going to the 2023 next Monday based on today's date, like whatever, September or whatnot, but it's in the wrong year. So then the date and the physical is not correct. And people pick up on that quickly. So
that's totally correct. Yeah.
So how do you get around that? Is that kind of a more expensive tier where you say you want dedicated integration to specific calendars, you need to have an API? Or do you even say, yeah, people don't really care about which is the latest president of which country? That's not part of the conversation. So it doesn't really matter if Julia knows who's running my country or not.
Yeah, first of all, if you're talking about the calendar application, we are always applying the recent date, like a current date, into the context of the agent. So if the agent should say, okay, we can meet tomorrow, we need to kind of calculate tomorrow is what. So what
Yeah.
is tomorrow? So tomorrow is October 3rd or some other stuff. So what is the next date? So to do that, you need to have the context of the current dates.
Hmm.
And the context, these context is directly ingested into the current interaction pipeline. Therefore, we can make sure that the date is always relevant to the
Conversation, and not when it
to
was trained. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. When you're talking about some other stuff connected to some well-known facts or some, let's say, external context, if you have the context that is more recent, or the company or the model, like a German model, doesn't know anything about, then you need to ingest this context via the fine tuning or RAG pipelines or some other stuff. So we need to make sure that all these data are taken into account. So that's why it is essential for the right performance of the agent to have all this contextual knowledge of your business, of your products, and of your kind of previous customer interactions, maybe, or something like that, into the context of the model. That is really important.
So I understand. So you also mentioned something there like RAG pipelines, right? So I know what it is, but
Yeah.
can you maybe in a few words describe what is a RAG pipeline? Maybe I'm a
Yeah.
university student and I've never heard of this, and
Yeah.
walk me through this.
Yeah. Imagine you have something like a knowledge database of your facts about your company. Let's say the company was founded at, I don't know, 1998, or we have product A, which consists of this and that, and it's priced like this. So these are the information about the products and so on. So like you have a huge set of facts about your company, about the industry, maybe about some other connected stuff. So what RAG pipeline is doing is basically when the question is asked about a particular product, it tries to find the relevant information specific to the semantic meaning of the query that customer is asking. For example, if you want to know more about the particular type of product, it should really query the relevant part of your knowledge database, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
and then extract these facts and ingest this into the real-time context of the model, into the conversation, and then it can give you the relevant answer. The process of preparing this data and generating the embeddings to get the right meaning connected to the right answer, to the right type of questions, it's basically what called the RAG pipeline. So as a result, you have a huge database of different facts about your company. You can use this database to basically ingest the facts out of it into your content
Right.
of your interactions.
But then maybe, okay, so you also use another word there, which sometimes people get confused. Embeddings. What is an embeddings?
Yeah, embedding is something like a huge vector, like a vector that ciphers the actual meaning of your piece of text, let's say, or some small set of tokens that you wanted to measure, let's say, what it is all about. So if you try and understand what is the multi-dimensional process, multi-dimensional space of different meanings, or universe of these meanings. So each fact is the dot in this space. And the embedding is basically the vector that owns this particular set of facts or this particular set of tokens. So it can be collected and calculated, and after that you can find the closest neighborhood, let's say closest facts that are sitting in the neighborhood of this particular request. That is also it can be really translated into the embeddings. You can just search what are the closest neighbors to your to your query, to your request in the sense of this embedding space. So that is how it works, like in general.
So we're gonna peel away the layers of the onion here a little bit. Not that I want to
Yeah,
put you on the spot. So I think this is
yeah,
independently of your application. I think it's a relatively well established workflow, the RAG, so the retrieval augmented generation pipelines. And I think my understanding is that it's like the process where you connect context with your company and your information into a mechanism where you can bring that into play. And when you say bring that into play, first there's the pre-processing of these documents. So it has to be in some shape or form, be that text or Excel or whatnot. But then there's a understanding of it. So when you say understanding, it's not that computers know what words mean, but what they do, if I understand correctly, is they will take a series of words together and create a mental model, if you think, or a vector space of what meaning is. And it can be
yeah,
a bit dodgy if you switch the order of words in English. It can have very different meanings, right? So how does a
yeah,
computer know that? That is what the embedding model is. It's a mathematical process of describing meaning from words into something that makes sense. Is that a
yeah,
fair way of describing it at a
yeah,
high level?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So if you can imagine the actual types of words and the situations when they're using together, you're actually capturing the underlying causal structure of your language. That is what embeddings are doing, basically. So how the words are being used together, what are their actual effects that are relevant to each other. So basically, so we have the fish and we have the cat, how the cat is different from the fish, and what else what does he leaves, and so on. So like it's really dependent on the actual nature of your world, let's say, right?
Right.
So on the what are the current embedding models are doing, and they're trying to recreate this outside world in the space of this meaning, in this semantic space, I would say. And this semantic space is basically what all the LLMs are using to find the right answer or meaningful answer to your questions as well. So that's why when they're generating the tokens, when they're generating the response, they're generating based on some pre-recorded sequences and learned sequences of the language that they got when they were trained. So, and when you're adding this context into your model, you're more or less like mimicking that. So
Yeah.
like you're not like retraining the whole model, but you are just ingesting relevant data into your contextual pipeline to make sure that your model knows what it is talking about.
So thank you for clarifying this, because I think people think of generative AI as one big thing, but there's actually kind of several steps in between that some people are maybe not so familiar with. And when people say
Yeah,
LLMs, like large language models, indeed, those are trained on humongous data sets and different number of parameters and all that stuff. But that is not the piece that is always moving, right? A large part of the value that you're bringing to the table is having a strong RAG pipeline that can bring that context, and you're shifting and putting some kind of guardrails of what these LLMs can and should be doing. So you're reducing their answer space dramatically
yeah,
by doing that properly, and you can shift it, right? And so it's
yeah,
not that you need to always retrain the LLM itself,
of
but there's a
course.
whole process of that. And then getting that right and articulate to people who are not so savvy about that is interesting. And actually, the mathematics of this embeddings is actually super interesting. And if you study maths or physics, I get this. It's an interesting problem to solve.
Exactly. Yeah, there are so many articles about the embedding space, like in general. That is I would say that is one of the key things. It's one of the essences of the artificial intelligence. Without the right embeddings, that is really difficult to reproduce the whole meaningful language structure. And that was like a holy grail of artificial intelligence from say early 2000s, or even like early 90s, when I started to be interested in this field. And yeah, many researchers were trying to find the actual logic within the language, and trying to do some kind of the models that can recreate the like a logical structure, like a formal grammatics or something like that. So structural linguistics, that's what structural linguistics is doing. So it was really difficult to really define the rules about how the meaningful sentences should be structured. And therefore, kind of neural networks came into place. And when they really defined that can be all these meanings can be trained and recorded by the neural network, it was like a huge surprise to many of the AI researchers. I know many of them just don't believe in the neural networks in general. They say like neural networks are really like that because actually they just like a statistical machines that recreate the training sample and so on. They cannot generate the actual meaningful sentences. So yeah, that was really like a widespread spread opinion in the AI research space those days.
Right. So I think it is a super interesting field, and I'm sure it's going to continue to evolve. And I really think what you're doing is a very concrete application of where it can be used. But it's also good to, I think, understand a little bit of what's behind the scenes, and it's independently if it's your secret sauce or not. This is a generic workflow that is somewhat common or not known outside maybe the machine learning expert fields. So I think that's an interesting thing to call out. So we've spoken about a lot of things. So let's say I'm interested in trying this out or reaching out to you, Max. What would be the right way for folk to reach out to you and try this out or have a deeper conversation with you?
Sure. You can go to our site, Callr.AI. You can go to my LinkedIn page, Max Mozgovoi, Mozgovoi. Yeah, feel free to give me some about what you're interested in. Maybe we can have a chat and then we can have a good collaboration.
And you've got no problem having more people call Julia, right? So you just call Julia and try it out for yourself, right?
Yeah, of course. You can scan the QR code. You can talk to Julia. You can really feel how it works, and you can give it a shot. Yeah, definitely.
That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it valuable. If you did, please consider sharing this episode with your friends and family or anyone who might benefit from it. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so take a moment to leave a review and let me know what you think. And if you haven't already, don't forget to give us a rating. It really helps us reach more people and bring you even more amazing content. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next episode.